few regions in the United States have a more complicated relationship with the concept of secession than the South. The legacy of the Confederacy, the scars of the Civil War, and the persistent identity of Southern exceptionalism have contributed to an ongoing debate over regional autonomy and federal authority. While outright secession is no longer a viable political movement, the idea of Southern independence has never fully disappeared. From the post-Reconstruction era to the modern resurgence of regional identity, the South has maintained a distinct cultural, economic, and political presence that occasionally manifests in calls for greater autonomy. This chapter explores the historical underpinnings of Southern secessionist sentiment, the resurgence of regional identity in contemporary politics, and the ways in which economic and cultural shifts have influenced discussions about autonomy. While the lost cause narrative that once dominated Southern discourse has diminished, new forms of Southern distinctiveness continue to emerge, shaping political debates and fueling periodic discussions about the South's relationship with the rest of the nation. The legacy of the Civil War. The road to secession. The Southern states' decision to secede from the Union in 1860 to 1861 was driven by a complex mix of economic, political, and social factors. Chief among these was the issue of slavery, which had become an irreconcilable divide between North and South. While some contemporary revisionist narratives attempt to frame secession as a matter of states' rights, historical documents, such as the Confederate States' Declarations of Secession, explicitly cite the preservation of slavery as a primary motive. Beyond slavery, the South viewed the federal government as increasingly dominated by Northern industrial and financial interests. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, without a single Southern electoral vote, symbolized the loss of political power in Washington. Secession was seen as a way to preserve the South's economic system, social hierarchy, and political influence, leading to the formation of the Confederate States of America. The defeat and its consequences. The Civil War's conclusion in 1865 resulted in the forced reintegration of the South into the Union, but the wounds of the conflict did not heal easily. Reconstruction policies sought to reshape Southern society by enfranchising formerly enslaved people and curbing the political power of former Confederate leaders. This period, however, was met with fierce resistance, culminating in the rise of Jim Crow laws, the Ku Klux Klan, and other measures aimed at reasserting white dominance in the region. While Reconstruction ended in 1877 with the withdrawal of federal troops, the South's economic and political structures remained distinct. The memory of the Confederacy became mythologized through the lost cause narrative, which romanticized the antebellum South, downplayed the role of slavery in secession, and framed Confederate leaders as noble defenders of states' rights. This revisionist history influenced Southern identity for generations, leading to a persistent divide between the region and the broader national political culture. The resurgence of regional identity. The Civil Rights era and Southern defiance. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s reignited tensions between the South and the federal government. Desegregation, voting rights, and civil rights legislation were met with fierce resistance from Southern leaders, some of whom openly advocated for defiance against federal mandates. Figures such as Alabama Governor George Wallace became national symbols of Southern opposition to federal intervention, famously declaring, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." While the South ultimately had to comply with federal civil rights laws, the era reinforced regional resentment toward perceived federal overreach. The idea that the federal government imposed unwanted social and economic changes on the South continued to shape conservative politics in the region, contributing to the rise of the Republican Party as the dominant political force in the former Confederate States. The Southern strategy and political realignment. In the latter half of the 20th century, the political landscape of the South underwent a dramatic transformation. The Democratic Party, once the stronghold of Southern political power, began to lose its grip on the region as civil rights policies and progressive social agendas alienated many white Southern voters. Richard Nixon's Southern strategy capitalized on this discontent, appealing to states' rights advocates, cultural conservatives, and those opposed to federal interventions in local affairs. By the 1980s, the South had largely shifted to the Republican Party, aligning itself with conservative values, religious fundamentalism, and free market economics. This shift was not just political but cultural, reinforcing the South's distinct identity within the broader American framework. The region's emphasis on traditional values, opposition to federal regulation, and strong religious influence has continued to shape its politics and policies well into the 21st century. Modern Southern autonomy movements, symbolic secession, and the rise of Dixie pride. While few serious movements advocate for Southern secession today, regional pride remains a strong force. The Confederate flag, despite its association with racism and white supremacy, continues to be displayed by some as a symbol of Southern heritage. Monuments to Confederate leaders, battles, and generals remain points of controversy, with efforts to remove them often met with fierce opposition. Beyond symbols, the idea of Southern distinctiveness has also manifested in cultural and political movements. The push for local governance, resistance to federal mandates on issues such as healthcare and environmental regulations, and opposition to progressive social policies are all expressions of the South's enduring regional identity. Economic and political considerations. Despite its historical grievances, the modern South has integrated deeply into the national and global economy. Cities like Atlanta, Houston, and Charlotte have become economic powerhouses, attracting businesses, technology firms, and cultural institutions. The influx of new residents from other parts of the country has also contributed to shifting demographics, softening some of the region's historical insularity. At the same time, economic challenges remain, particularly in rural areas where poverty, underfunded education systems, and healthcare disparities persist. The South's relationship with the federal government remains complex, with some states relying heavily on federal funding while simultaneously advocating for reduced federal influence. Is secession a real possibility? While contemporary discussions of Southern autonomy remain largely symbolic, there are still occasional calls for secession from fringe groups. Organizations like the League of the South advocate for Southern independence, arguing that the cultural and political differences between the South and the rest of the country are too vast to reconcile. However, these movements lack significant political traction and are generally dismissed as unrealistic by mainstream political leaders. Legal precedent also stands firmly against secession. The Supreme Court's ruling in Texas versus White, 1869, established that unilateral secession is unconstitutional, reinforcing the idea that the Union is indestructible. Any serious attempt at secession would require overwhelming political support and likely face insurmountable legal and military opposition. Instead, modern Southern autonomy efforts are more likely to take the form of increased states' rights activism, legal challenges to federal authority, and advocacy for greater regional representation in national decision-making processes. Conclusion. The South's history of secession, rebellion, and regional identity remains a powerful undercurrent in American political discourse. While the Confederacy was militarily defeated, its ideological and cultural legacy continues to shape Southern politics, economy, and society. The idea of a separate Southern nation is unlikely to become a reality, but the region's distinctiveness ensures that questions of autonomy, governance, and federal authority will persist for generations to come. As the country continues to evolve, the South must reconcile its historical grievances with its modern economic and political realities. The question is not whether the South will rise again in the form of secession, but rather how it will define its role in a rapidly changing United States. Whether through political realignment, cultural preservation, or economic strategy, the South's identity will remain a defining feature of the American experiment.